Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Let's start today's meeting. Item number 1, the adoption of our agenda. If there are no objections from your side, I propose to adopt the agenda as it has been presented. Item number 2, we have the approval of minutes of meetings. The minutes of our meetings on the 1st and 2nd of September and the 14th of October have been distributed to your offices. My announcements can be brief. Our meeting is as usual being web streamed except for the parts held in camera. For our meeting today and our meeting tomorrow, we have interpretation in the following languages: English, French, German, Italian, Dutch, Greek, Spanish, Portuguese, Finnish, Swedish, Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian, Hungarian, Polish, Slovakian, Slovenian, Bulgarian, Croatian, Romanian, and Passive Czech. May I once again remind you that all the interpreters rely on the quality of the sound and video of remote participants in order to get your message across. Please do be aware that phone interventions and audio-only connections cannot be interpreted. Let me stress that it is mandatory for members physically present in meetings to wear a mask at all times except while speaking. Item number 4, Chair's announcements concerning coordinators' decisions. In line with Rule 214 of Parliament's Rules of Procedure, the final record of decisions of the AFET coordinators meeting on the 18th of November this year has been uploaded on the AFET intranet with all other documents for this meeting. They will be attached to the minutes of this meeting. Item number 5, exchange of views on 1 year since the ceasefire between Azerbaijan and Armenia. On the 9th of November, we marked the first anniversary of the ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It was signed following the deadly military confrontations that started on the 27th of September last year. This 6-week-long conflict claimed the lives of more than 6,500 people, and unfortunately, despite the ceasefire agreement, military personnel and civilians continued to die on and around the front line. As recently as 2 weeks ago, deadly clashes erupted on the border between the two countries, giving rise to the worst fighting since the signing of the ceasefire agreement. The AFET standing rapporteurs and the chair of our delegation for relations with the South Caucasus immediately called for the rapid de-escalation of the situation and welcomed the signing of a ceasefire. I welcome the renewed will of the Armenian and Azerbaijani presidents to sit together and to negotiate, to discuss some of the most contentious issues linked to the conflict, such as border delimitation, demining, and the exchange of war prisoners. The meeting on the 26th of September in Sochi was a first important step in this respect. All of us now look forward to the forthcoming meeting, which will take place on the sidelines of the Eastern Partnership Summit on the 15th of December here in Brussels. The EU, that is clear, remains committed to a lasting conflict settlement based on confidence-building measures and on a quick resumption of negotiations within the process led by the Minsk Group chairs. With all that in mind, I have invited representatives from the EEAS and the Commission's DG NEAR to take stock of the developments since the ceasefire agreement and to exchange views on the current situation on the ground, as well as on the challenges ahead of us in this very complex region. Regrettably, the EU Special Representative for the South Caucasus and the crisis in Georgia, Toivoklar, had to cancel his participation at a short notice. First, I would like to warmly welcome, and he's sitting up front next to me, Luc de Vigne, a regular and welcome guest in this committee, the Deputy Managing Director for Russia, Eastern Partnership, Central Asia, Regional Cooperation and OSCE at the European External Action Service, back to our committee. Mr. de Vigne, as you will also cover Mr. Klaar's remarks related to the situation on the ground and to our position as EU and our actions in the region, I will give you the floor for 10 minutes. After we have heard Mr. de Vigne, I will welcome Lawrence Meredith from the DG NEAR, and then we have the possibility for an exchange of views with members. Mr. de Vigne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, honourable members of the European Parliament. Indeed, Toivoklar could not make it because he is actually travelling in the Caucasus to prepare to prepare the meetings that you've alluded to of the President Aliyev of Azerbaijan and Prime Minister Pashinyan of Armenia in the margins of the soon-to-come Eastern Partnership Summit, 15 December. Both leaders have been invited by President of European Council, Charles Michel, to have side meetings during this summit. It is quite clear, as you have referred to, Mr. Chairman, that the situation remains very tense, a bit more than 1 year after this bloody 44-day war, and the recent clashes that you've alluded to in the middle of November with serious casualties on the international border. And it is important to underline it, not in the Karabakh region, but international border, is worrying. The EU institutions have reacted promptly in the sense that President Michel had the day after, on 16 November, telephone calls with both leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, obviously asking for urgent de-escalation and full ceasefire, as well as the EU Special Representative was in contact with the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs and the Russian Deputy Foreign Minister. As after 17 November, the situation has stabilized in the sense there has been no more shootings or killings, but it remains a very tense situation. On 19 November, President Michel again called the two leaders offering to discuss around 15 December. We also have seen that both leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan established a direct communication channel between the military at the Ministry of Defense level in order to prevent a re-happening of the latest incident, and was put in place on 19 November. You have also seen that on 26 November in Sochi, invited by President Putin, both leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan met. They issued a statement basically agreeing on three things. First, to increase the stability and the security through the work of a bilateral commission on the delimitation of the state border, with consultative assistance of Russia, which was requested by the parties. You know that indeed the demarcation of the state border, and I underline this is the state border, this is nothing to do with the Karabakh conflict, is disputed. Secondly, they announced, but without giving much detail, that they made significant progress on so-called sensitive issues of humanitarian nature. I suspect that behind that lies the issue of prisoners of war, but we don't have details. And the Armenians still claim that they have a number of prisoners of war in Azerbaijan, which the Azeri deny the status of prisoners of war. They say that they are terrorists who have violated the border of Azerbaijan. And thirdly, they discussed economic issues and unblocking the transport corridors. You have to be aware that the name corridor is not liked at all by Armenia because it presupposes that Armenia would not have the control of what goes in, what goes out, etc. in that so-called corridor. But for the convenience of our understanding, I refer to corridors, railway and road links, which were supposed to connect Azerbaijan with the western part of Azerbaijan, Nakhchivan, and further Turkey. So they announced that this trilateral working group on these economic so-called corridors would meet. What is another element, a positive, I would say, element, is that in the framework of the OSCE Minsk process, and as you know, the OSCE Minsk process is the only international format agreed to resolve the conflict of around Karabakh, even if Azerbaijani rhetoric says the conflict is resolved, but the latest clashes demonstrate the opposite, as well as the rhetoric. And the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan met the co-chairs of the Minsk group twice in autumn, in September and November, and are supposed to meet tomorrow in the margins of the OSCE Ministerial in Stockholm. So to conclude, our position is obviously to try to have a secure, stable and prosperous South Caucasus, which is also important for us since the three countries belong to Eastern Partnership, and that we also are developing connectivity in the region, and obviously connectivity and state of war or hostility is contradictory. You know that President Michel went in July to the region, Commissioner Varey as well, and three foreign ministers of EU member states went as well in June on behalf of the High Representative. So there is clearly a commitment and a willingness from our side, but obviously the situation is very much also in the hands of the military and those who have boots on the ground, which is only Russia at this stage. It is quite clear that very opinous, very acute issues like the release of detainees and the demining, respectively for Armenia and Azerbaijan, I think are clearly complicating the issues, and it is, I think, not rational to believe that there will be much peace without these two issues being resolved. So we remain, and I'll finish by that, Mr. Chairman, remain supportive of the Minsk Group process of the OSCE led by its co-chairs as being the only internationally agreed format to have an in-depth resolution of that conflict and a peace treaty, which of course is badly missing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luc de Vigne, for your introductory remarks. And now I hand over to Lawrence Meredith from DG NEAR. I understand that he is connected remotely. Mr. Meredith, you have the floor for 7 minutes.
Please press on the speak button. Thank you. Only once.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you, but we cannot see you.
Good morning. We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I'm very sorry about this.
Now we can see you. Fine, go ahead.
Okay, super. Thank you. I'm so sorry. We had huge difficulties with the internet this morning. I do apologize, Chair. No, thank you very much for inviting me to join this very important meeting. I would have liked to have been there in person, but unfortunately my son got COVID last night, so it's been a little bit of a frantic 24 hours. I would just like to be very brief and add to what Mr. de Vigne has already said. I joined Commissioner Varey in his recent meetings with all three foreign ministers of the Caucasus and the margins of the Eastern Partnership Ministerial a couple of weeks ago. And of course, that was shortly before or the day before the tragic resumption of violence between Armenia and Azerbaijan. I just want to be very clear on our side, on the European Commission, that we are extremely committed to do everything possible to enable a sustainable peace in the interests of all the countries of the Caucasus. And I think Mr. de Vigne has been very clear also about the actions, both of the External Action Service and President Michel. I know that's also the ambition of this House. On our side, we're ready to mobilize all our instruments. We've already put 17 million euros of humanitarian assistance following the 44-day war last year. We're looking at all the options now as to how we can engage and regain trust between the parties in this situation, especially important on the eve of the Eastern Partnership Summit. We're also looking at, in the context of the proposed economic and investment plan, Commissioner Varey and our services are looking at all the possibilities to invest in a way that is in the interests of the parties in a sustainable peace. So in particular in those regions affected by conflict, and to see how we can strengthen connectivity. And of course, the crucial principle is it must be what the parties can agree on. That is paramount, and of course we do so all in support of the agreed formats. We also know that the Georgians are reaching out and seeking to undertake mediation facilitation where the parties can agree to that, and that has the full support also of our side. So we will mobilize our instruments. We have, as you know from this House, a program called EU for Dialogue. Of course, the situation has changed so substantially since it was initially designed, but it is a flexible instrument, and it can allow both for confidence building and for some socio-economic support. It also works in partnership with the UN, with civil society, and with member states. So on our side, we're strongly committed to find every way possible to support steps towards a sustainable peace. Thank you very much, Chair, and apologies for the connection difficulties.
Thank you, Mr. Meredith. I will now give the floor first to the Chair of our standing delegation with the countries of the Southern Caucasus, Marina Kaljurand. Is she connected?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. And to start with, I would really like to thank Mr. Davin and Mr. Meredith for being with us today and explaining the situation. I absolutely agree that the situation 1 year after ceasefire is worrisome, is troubling, is tense. And that is the reason why, with standing rapporteurs on Armenia and Azerbaijan, I have been keeping very close eye on the situation, and we have tried to make our positions very clear with the statements that also Chair mentioned. I have had bilateral meetings with the Armenian Foreign Minister, with Azerbaijani ambassador, Armenian ambassador, and if I might say on a very subjective feeling, then I do not see today much appetite for reconciliation. There are still lots of accusations coming from each side. Unfortunately, rhetorics, especially from Azerbaijani side, has not changed. There are smaller things that are not small in this context, like the Victory Memorial in Baku, which definitely does not help to making the situation better. You mentioned very right points, and I would like maybe to underline a couple of more. In Strasbourg in 2 weeks, we will have PCC with Azerbaijan. Unfortunately, the normal working routine was disturbed by the COVID pandemic, but in February, I hope to go to Yerevan and finally start meeting people face to face. But now coming to the PCC with Azerbaijan, I see a new trend. Azerbaijan refuses to put on agenda Nagorno-Karabakh. So the question they are trying to show now is the conflict between Armenia, Azerbaijan more widely. And if we look at the recent border incidents on internationally recognized borders of Armenia and Azerbaijan, that trend for me is also worrisome. There are still captives, prisoners of war, other captives, and with the recent clashes, I understand that the number has again grown, with additional 30 plus Armenians being arrested. The question of connections, I do see that there are positive improvements, but at the same time, the location of the connection, I do not want to use the word corridor, creates lots of tensions. Where Armenia wants to return back to the routes that were used before, they're referring to the Soviet time routes. Azerbaijan wants to find the new ones. So here is also one of my questions to the speakers. You mentioned the visits, you mentioned the phone calls, and I do not doubt that there is commitment from the EU side. But what can we do more, and what can we do better? I also agree very much with Mr. Levin that the power is in the hands of those whose troops are on the ground. But that should not be excuse for us, for EU being more engaged. Unfortunately, I haven't seen it much so far. The agreements that have been reached, the exchanges of prisoners that have been reached, ceasefire that has been reached, has all been mediated by Russia. And EU has been kind of sidelined in this process. So my question is, where, how, and what can and we should do better? And my question also to Mr. Meredith is, you said that you are looking in all options, you're looking into economic and investment plans, you're looking into the program EU for dialogue, but can you please be more precise? What exactly is on the table? And to conclude, first, I think we have to continue being very precise, very vocal on the need of international solution of the conflict, because the conflict is not solved, conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, with the participation of OSCE, Minsk co-chairs. Full stop. There are no other alternatives. Yes, I recognize the bilateral discussions between two countries, and the demarcation might lead to kind of confidence building between those countries.
Marina, can I ask you to conclude?
Yes, and so these are two of my main questions, and I'm once again, thank you for being with us at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your statement and your precise questions. We have two standing rapporteurs for Azerbaijan and Armenia in our committee, and I will now give the floor to them for 3 minutes. Ms. Zofko, who is the standing rapporteur for Azerbaijan, cannot be with us, so her statement will be read out by Michael Gahler.
Yes, thank you very much. And as Juliana Zofko is on her way back as chief observer from Honduras, she cannot make it. She says, Dear Chair, dear colleagues, 1 year after the ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan, I strongly regret the continued frequent military incidents on the border between the two countries. The recent flare-up, costing the lives of tens of people on both sides, is a new depth in the bilateral relations and does not contribute to the stability and peace of the region. During last year, we have seen moves on both sides, military forces, to occupy strategic points at the border, leading to increased tensions and skirmishes. Instead, I call on the Armenian and Azerbaijani authorities to move from a military agenda to political and diplomatic dialogue on the demarcation of the border. Since new border lines cross villages and farming lands, demarcation is necessary to provide peace and clarity to citizens. The Russian-mediated ceasefire of last year should serve as a starting point for new relations. I welcome the announcement of the upcoming meeting between President Aliyev and Pashinyan in Brussels on the 15th of December. This shows the EU's commitment to support the normalization of relations and stability of the region. These efforts should lead to a restart of the dialogue on a sustainable settlement under the leadership of the Minsk Group. End of quote. Thank you. And I will make my statement later as a coordinator.
Thank you for reading out Juliana Zofko's statement. The Armenia Standing Rapporteurs, Andrei Kovachev, please.
Thank you, David. Thank you to the speakers. First of all, let me make maybe one more general philosophical observation. This is so sad to see that on this planet, the human civilization is still using force to solving their disagreements. This is so sad that the Minsk Group worked for the last 15 years with 3 basic principles, which apparently both sides agreed: territorial integrity, non-use of force, and the self-determination. Finally, that was from the one side resolved by military force, and is continuing to see that who is stronger, the strongest takes it all. we are very nice, what also the speaker said, we are committed, we make statement, and I would like to thank you very much to the Madam Kalurant for her engagement, and together with Juliana Zovko and myself, we are following, and we also do statements. But European Union is not seen as a, as a credible negotiator or broker. This is the only thing what we have, and what's very correctly said is the Minsk Group role, the Minsk Group co-chair. However, the one side, because I met also ambassadors from Armenia, from Azerbaijan, on one side it's very clear that they consider this basic principle of the Minsk Group from the last few decades non-existing anymore. They are even not talking about possibility of autonomy. This is territory of Azerbaijan and basta, and nothing more. I'm very skeptical, and I'm very, also disappointed. Okay, we have 1 year since this trilateral agreement. We have seen so many violations of this, even this agreement. It is to be welcome all kind of meetings between the both leaders, Pashinyan and Aliyev, now last in Sochi with this short statement. The initiative of President Jean-Michel is also to be very welcome. But if something tangible will be achieved, this is a big question mark. Without reconciliation, and this House mentioned very clear that it's a prisoner of war covered by the Geneva Convention. So please also use this, not say that the one side is consider them as a terrorist, so this is why they are not going to release them. There is an urgent need of reconciliation for the both sides. These people need to live together for the future. They are neighbors. So we need to push both sides to stop with the hostile rhetoric and to close this park, to stop with violence using artillery, to stop catching people, and to try indeed reconciliation. The young generations need perspective in this region, need indeed infrastructure, IT, airports, whatever, opening borders, etc. All these points are very, very relevant. But first, need to stop with the hate and the hostilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei Kovachev. Now, the coordinators have the floor for 2 minutes each, and from the EPP, I give the floor to Michael Gahler.
Thank you very much. I do not want to repeat what has been said by, among others, Marina Kaljurand and also by Andrei Kovachev. My question goes more in the direction how we as the European Union can upgrade our relevance. I mean, from the outset, we have not been as European Union in the Minsk Group. I mean, it's clear France acts on our behalf, and that's fine. And still, somehow, I have the feeling a real added weight could have been there if we as a union as a whole had been present there. The next question that I ask myself is there a coincidence why these violence, these things flare up now? Have we got an explanation from intelligence sources or why it is that it happens now? I mean, it coincides with other parallel, smaller and bigger events in Central Eastern Europe and up to the Balkans. Is there a concerted background from Moscow? I mean, if I look at Belarus border, I look at the arms massing up on the Ukrainian border. I see what happens in the Republika Srpska. I see the pressure of Gazprom on Moldova. And now these things, is that a coincidence, or do we see a common denominator there to create little conflicts here and there at the same time in parallel to keep us busy and perhaps distract from the real thing? And is the real thing a planned invasion, well, on Ukraine from the Russian side? These are all, for me, question marks that remain unanswered. And with the particularity now here on this, have we any insight who has an interest now to have this happening again at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. For the S&D, Nacho Sanchez-Amor.
Thank you, David, our guest. First, let me come back to my motto, David. If Mr. Michel is conducting European foreign policy, it has to be accountable before this Parliament. And I come back to the issue. Some of the colleagues said we have been sidelined. No, we have been offered even an entrance. We have been there. For that reason, we can be sidelined, and the question is, we are now trying to reshuffle a Minsk group that apparently is not functional, and for that reason, we have to assess what is our position towards Russia as a broker. Do we support Russia as a broker? Do we want to be a co-broker? Do we want simply to accept the fact that Russia is the only broker and the only guardian of the agreements? We have to be clear on that. Of course, we can offer our help in the framework of our neighbourhood policy to try to push some points of the agenda. In my view, one has to be this contact line or partial contact line has to become an accepted international border to try to clarify the issue. The other one, and I asked to our colleagues about the corridors, especially the corridor between the current geographical borders of Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. Do we consider that the corridor is included in some way in the agreements of the last year or not? What is our assessment of this quarrel? The other thing is we have to ask clearly to Armenia to deliver the maps of mining. This is an international obligation, and we have to convey this message to Armenia side, and of course we have to help finish the question of the both prisoners. Thank you for both guests, and please could you be more specific, or could you elaborate on the issue of the corridor, because it of course has to do with the position of Turkey in this area.
Thank you, Nacho. Next is Petros Austrevicius for Renew.
Thank you, Chair. Well, once again, it's a very sad moment once we are speaking about the situation in South Caucasus, and in particular relations between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Colleagues, it's a very, very bad message before the Eastern Partnership Summit. Once two member states of this framework and this initiative are still in a very hot stage of conflict. So it's a reply probably to Michael's question. I mean, why is now? I think timetables are well known, I mean, to some who really play that game against those countries and against us. Let's be frank. And I would really be even more critical. I would say Eastern Partnership policy is so marginalized in South Caucasus for the time of being. With the political tensions in Georgia, with the open conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, we are losing 50% of our, let's say, assets in the Eastern Partnership strategy. Indeed, Mr. Chair, I wonder, what is the role of the special representative? Is he somewhere now? I mean, why he didn't join us today? Why we didn't receive a good briefing from him? That's his business. Is he involved in some special, very special, we can't hear, we can't be informed? Sorry, I'm losing track. I mean, I do not know, I mean, how the foreign policy is made. I mean, probably by some magicians, but I don't know the names, even the place. I mean, they do some magic things. And reply again to my good Social Democrat colleague. You know, I have a feeling that it's a football match, but referee from time to time joins one or another team. And that referee has a clear name. It's Russia. Okay? It pretends to be a referee, but it's not a referee. I mean, it depends on the stage of the game. You know, seriously speaking, so we have to speak about and think any security mechanism on the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. There is no security mechanism for the time of being. If we are serious, if we still believe that we can exercise meaningful foreign policy and security policy line, let's think about anything from CSDP. A civilian mission, probably, starting from, but we need this urgently. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Petros. Let me just say that at the beginning, I explained that we had invited the Special Representative for the South Caucasus and Crisis in Georgia to this meeting. Regrettably, can't be with us. Why? Because he had to cancel his participation because he's actually in the region just now in the moment. But I guess that Luc de Vigny can explain more what Toivo Klar is up to in these days. Next is Marketa Gregorova for the Greens. Is she connected remotely?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes,
I hope so. Amazing, thank you for this, Chair. The conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the Nagorno-Karabakh has had negative impact on the population of all parties involved, of course, and the innocent civilians had been violated, and power games of both were trying to justify loss of many innocent lives due violations of ceasefires. It is not acceptable that peace agreement is not fully complied, and prisoners of war are still in captivity, including those captured during further clashes. I would like to also remind here to the respective parties that any violence, harassment and ill treatment of prisoners are simply not acceptable, and that the provisions of international humanitarian and human rights law must be fully respected. Despite the agreement, there have been repeated clashes, and only a few weeks ago fighting with the use of armoured vehicles and artillery took place again at the borders, which led to the most serious incident between the two since the end of the war. And I must stress the necessity of the peace treaty. That is why what I would like to ask your honest opinion with the current situation. Is peace even sustainable, and how has been the EAS and HRVP involved in following the implementation of the ceasefire? Moreover, what has been done in order to support stabilization, post-conflict rehabilitation, reconstruction and confidence-building measures? And what formats of cooperation with EU are discussed with both of the parties? Lastly, what are the concrete plans for the Eastern Partnership Summit in regards of the conflict resolution, overcoming tensions and maintaining a peace truce? Thank you.
Thank you. According to my information, the ID and the ECR have not requested to take the floor, so I can now move on to the left. Stelios Kologlu, are you connected? Stelios is also not connected. Then for the non-inscrit, Martin Genjashi.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all our guests who are here today and have given us an update on the current situation in Nagorno-Karabakh situation. We have been talking about creating sustainable peace and mobilizing instruments to micromanage the crisis once again, and I'm very sorry to hear and to say that what we seem to be the best at is micromanaging crisis situations and catastrophe situations, while I think when the questions arise, why did this happen today and why, who saw this coming? Well, 30 years have passed since the end of the first Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Since then, all those institutions that are Western institutions, ever since the beginning of the 20th century, the world order is basically governed and managed by Western institutions. The UN, OEC, all NATO, all these organizations have issued dozens of resolutions on the subject of Nagorno-Karabakh, which have said that the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan must be protected, minorities, ethnic minorities' rights should be respected and safeguarded. We have said it all, and now we are all of a sudden surprised that a conflict has appeared. Everybody knew that there is going to be an explosion of this conflict sooner or later. It's a valid question to ask why now, but to ask why did it happen, I think is completely illegitimate. We exactly knew what is the situation there in the region, and we also knew that Russia is on the side of Armenia, it has boots on the ground. We also know that Turkey is going to be involved since it's a NATO member state, and if there's going to be a conflict, then we are going to have a NATO member state involved on one side in the conflict, and then we have trouble. And we are being sidelined, we are looking at the situation and asking ourselves the question, how did this happen and how did this occur? So my question, and the only question I have, is really, can we draw conclusions? Can we learn lessons from a frozen conflict that we just couldn't cope with in 30 years? We have issued resolutions, but we couldn't implement a single letter of any of the resolutions that we have issued in the past 30 years. There are a number of frozen conflicts in the world today, and I just fret the moment when the next one is going to explode, and we are going to look around and ask the question, how, why, and why now? Thank you.
Thank you. Going back to the left, Mick Wallace will now take the floor.
Thanks very much, David. And just following up on my Hungarian colleague, I've been a bit surprised that there's been so little mention of Turkey. And it is a NATO partner of the EU. And I mean, surely Turkey are playing a very strong role here and not necessarily a positive one. And has there been, I suppose my question is there communication between the EU and Turkey on the issue? And everyone is saying that Russia are the only broker at the table. And we want peace in the region. We don't want them fighting with each other. It's not in our interest. Is there merit in actually talking to the Russians? Or is that a no-go area? Thanks.
Thank you, Mick Wallace. Colleagues, I would suggest that we also give the floor to the other speakers, and then we have one round of answers with Mr. De Vigna and Mr. Meredith. I still have requests to take the floor from Andreas Kubilius, Demetris Papadakis, Clement Groschel, Isabel Santos, Viola von Kramon. Have I forgotten someone? Then we have Mr. Getter. Enough. Anyone else? Okay, then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 colleagues who can take the floor. If you can keep it to 1.5 minutes, then I would be very thankful. Andreas Kubilius is first.
Well, thanks a lot, Chair. To continue some comments, what we see in general, in not only in South Caucasus, but more broadly in Eastern Partnership, we can see really that Russia, first of all, is very actively creating conflicts, and then Russia is pretending to be the single, peace broker. That is in general. Second, all the formats where either EU or OSCE or different countries are participating, trying to resolve those conflicts, Minsk Group, Minsk Process, Normandy Format, Geneva Talks, whatever. I don't know, all the names even. They are not giving any kind of, effective outcome or result. Yes, those are the formats which we have the only ones, but we need to be very clearly, we need to see very clearly that they are not bringing any kind of outcome. So we can guess why, maybe Russia is, playing games, whatever, but that is reality. So we can continue with the same formats and we shall have the same results. Last point, this is a special case, of course, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Two countries which are fighting each other, both partners in Eastern Partnership. What is the problem? Peace is not bringing benefit for them. That is a problem. They do not see what they will get if the peace will be established. We are not offering them any kind of, big investment or whatever, and then the war for them is more popular. They do not know who will win, but you know, at the first Armenians won, now Azeris won, and that is how things are going on. So either we shall show them that the peace brings beneficial outcome, or we shall continue in the same way as we have now.
Thank you, Andreas. Dimitris Papadakis, please.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got to be honest and admit that we can't ignore the crucial role that Russia plays in the region and Turkey as well. They're also playing a crucial role in the region which we can't ignore. I think we need to focus on the prisoners, the other problems that are bedeviling the region, so that we can make things easier to exercise pressure from outside. We know until we know what's happening in the region in very great detail, it's going to be very difficult for us to play a positive role there. We need to look at the humanitarian aspects of this as well. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Renew, Clement Groschel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for all the guests for the introductory speeches. What I would like to say is that I'm afraid that the European Union in this case is a little bit too outlined from the whole event, and that we need to have a wider perspective of this Southern Caucasus region, because as I can see it and as I understand it, it's not only that Russia is playing an important game in this region, it is also Turkey which is playing an important region, and what is going on and what we are seeing now, I can fully agree with what colleague Mr. Galler said, and also Petras, but the most important thing is that we are actually seeing a sort of proxy war between Turkey and Russia, and why we need to get involved, and what I would expect a little bit more engagement from the European Union and from the Internal Action Service, is because I think that in the future there are bigger stories to come for us, because at a certain point Russia and Turkey will not be as friendly as they are now, and this is already evident, and at a certain point we will be seeing a showdown between those two, let's say, regional powers, or at least countries which will try to be regional powers, and this will be the biggest challenge at the end. So solving or somehow supporting the events or preventing escalation in the region on both sides, Azerbaijani and Armenian side, is of our strategic interest, because what will follow will probably be something on the scale of what we are now talking about Ukraine, or even more. So this is why I would expect a little bigger and more intensive engagement from our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. Next is Alexander Yordanov.
Thank you, Chair. There are two questions, there are two issues that are focusing the attention of the international community. On the one hand, the issue of the borders between the two independent states, and the second issue is on the attitude of the Azerbaijan authorities to the Armenian population in Nagorno-Karabakh. And here we need to face a dilemma that has recurred again and again and again, and has been debated in Parliament too. This is the opposition between two fundamental principles. On the one hand, the right of the nations to self-determination, and on the other hand, the principle of territorial integrity. This dilemma can be resolved only through mutual agreement. However, I agree here that until Russia is the so-called broker or mediator in this conflict, in practice, we have a problem not only with these principles and with the issue of the borders and with the attitude to the Armenian population. We have a problem with democracy in that region, and herein is precisely our role, and we need to work so that Russia can leave its role as mediator, Turkey can abandon its role as mediator, and the European Union to be the intermediary if these two countries consider themselves to be democratic states that wish a democratic future. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague Jordanov. Isabel Santos.
Muito obrigada, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, Chairman. Basically, I can repeat the speech I made about a year ago, which makes me very sad. The European Union's attitude to these frozen conflicts is just wrong. We are leaving the field open for other players to enter instead of us. We should be much more worried about Turkey and Russia. What I wanted to ask our EEAS representatives who are here in the meeting is a very specific question. The European Parliament has adopted various resolutions, but I'd like to mention the most recent one we've adopted on the conflict and ask how many and which points of this resolution have actually been acted on by the European Commission or the EEAS. Can you clarify that for me, please? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Isabel. Yola von Kramon.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the EAS and to the Commission for presenting their views. What I've heard, and I share many of the colleagues' views here, that the Minsk format hasn't worked, that the EU was not present, that a telephone call is surely not enough, that people are rather frustrated, not just because the exchange of soldiers, prisoners has not worked, landmines are still there, but that the EU is mainly absent. And so it's good that Charles Michel will hold mediation talks and the framework of the summit of Eastern Partnership, but this is not sufficient. We need any kind of a committed long-term, as Petras has proposed, security mechanism or something more persistent. And it should be in our interest to be present and not just to pay there. I think that France was not the honest broker on behalf of the European Union. So let's really be honest and find something else what makes sure that the 3+3 format is not what the region needs. Iran, Turkey and Russia would not be the, let's say, progressive forces which would be seen from the Armenian, but also probably from the Azerbaijani side for their long-term perspective. So I would like to see Mr. Borrell and others leadership from the European Union put together their forces and set up a task force, shuttle diplomacy with a presence on the ground, and then also keep accountable here in front of the Parliament. This would be what it needs.
Thank you. And the final speaker is Bernard Guetta.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chairman. I hate to have to say what I'm going to say, and you're going to hate me for saying it, but I fear that in this conflict, right now, we've got very few means to involve ourselves. Like other speakers, I recommend, therefore, that we focus on the problem of prisoners and mines. That will give us the possibility of asking Azerbaijan to do something, asking Armenia to do something, so we can play the genuine role of an honest broker, but in a very limited area. In the long term, as to what the EU can do, I would say that, remember that the source of this conflict was Stalin's divide and rule policy, and include in the territory of certain of the then Soviet republics little pockets of population from other republics. That's where it all started. So let's say that, and let's say very clearly that the day that can be solved, that crisis, will be when Armenians and Azeris agree to bring to the table not just negotiations about Karabakh, but also about Nakhchivan. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Merci bien. No further requests to take the floor, so we now have about 20-25 minutes to conclude. I would suggest that first, Mr. De Vigne, you try to answer as many questions as possible. There were some rather detailed, precise questions, and then we'll conclude with Lawrence Meredith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the honourable members for the questions. So I have a few minutes to solve a 30-year-old conflict and what solutions can be brought. Bit of a challenge. But first of all, I think the EU does what it can. I do not accept the accusation that the EU doesn't do anything. I don't even accept the accusation that the EU doesn't do enough, because what more could be done? What more could be done in the absence of EU military force? And I note also that, by the way, amongst the Minsk Group co-chairs, not only France and Russia were there, but also the United States, who also do not have boots on the ground. So when the guns start to speak, as unfortunately happened last year, it's very difficult for diplomats to prevent that or to stop it. And this is what has happened. Now, I fully agree that that this ceasefire agreement, which is unfortunately not a peace agreement, has not solved all the issues, and we see it now. And this is, in a way, some form of failure for Russia as well as guarantor of that peace agreement, that it brokered. Don't get me wrong. I think it is good that the peace agreement was brokered, and I think the peace agreement is more important, and a ceasefire agreement, not a peace agreement, is more important than not to continue. The EU has already supplied humanitarian emergency funds, and maybe Lawrence will say a word on that, support for demining, financial support for demining through UNDP, and the political engagement has been there by President Michel, by High Representative, and by Commissioner Vare. But at the end of the day, the EU cannot substitute the goodwill of the parties to make peace. The question of the EU role in the Minsk Group co-chair actually predates when the Minsk Group co-chair was founded in '92, so it predates when the EU had a foreign policy, but it's a good question indeed. On the questions on Mr. Sanchez with the so-called corridors in the agreement, I prefer to quote the agreement, which doesn't speak of corridors, but it says all economic and transport connections in the region shall be unblocked. The Republic of Armenia shall guarantee security of transport connections between the western region of Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan. And the border guard service of the Russian Federal Security Service shall be responsible for overseeing the transport connection. So the whole debate is precisely that Armenia does not accept this name corridor, which would imply some form of absence of control. And so I prefer to quote, this is what I've done, the paragraph 9 of the ceasefire agreement of last year. On the issues of demining and prisoners, we have constantly, as honourable members have suggested, encouraged both parties, on one hand to hand over the demining maps, and on the other hand to release all prisoners and detainees, which which is a necessary confidence-building measure. But both parties disagree on that. The Armenians say that they have handed over. The Azerbaijani declares that the maps were not reliable or are not sufficient. And they say that the detainees are not prisoners of war. So, again, it's difficult. We are ready to do more for also economic rehabilitation, but for that you need to have peace. Which private investor is going to invest in a region where you don't know when the next violence explosion is going to flare up? I disagree with the Hungarian honourable member who said that it was a Western institution, because I remind him that Russia is part as a Minsk Group co-chair. And on the question of Turkey, Mr. Wallace, yes, we do talk to Turks. Actually, Toyvukla was in Turkey meeting senior officials recently. We also talk to the Russians, of course, even if you know what the relations between the EU and Russia are, which doesn't make always things simple, but I hope the Russians can see that we are doing this for peace and not for whatever other reasons. I think that that covers most of it. Yes, thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. De Vigne. Mr. Meredith, please.
Mr. Meredith, can you refresh your connection, because your camera and your microphone is not enabled, so if you can refresh. Thank you.
While we're waiting, I'll give the floor back to Mr. De Vigne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one word on Eastern Partnership. I agree that it is, of course, extremely worrying that two of our Eastern partners are in that stage. But again, I don't think it's the EU's fault to be blamed. The Eastern Partnership is obviously not a format for making peace and for resolving a conflict. But I'm happy that it remains a very relevant format for both countries who have confirmed their participation at the 15 December summit. Thank you.
Thank you. In the meantime, has Mr. Meredith refreshed his connection? Okay. Mr. Meredith, your microphone is not on, I am informed.
Mr. Meredith, I see that you are using Google Chrome, so maybe if you could switch from browser and use Safari again, just to try if it works like this. Thank you.
Would you like to take the floor again in the meantime? I think that some colleagues are still hoping for more. Please feel free if you have more information. Oh, now he's connected.
Okay.
So, Mr. Meredith, please go ahead.
Please press on the speak button only once. Can you please press on the speak button? The line needs to be red.
Right, we're getting there.
Now
I do apologize. I was initially advised to be on Google Chrome. Now I'm back on Safari. I'm doing my best. I apologize. Thank you very much. I would, and thank you for this extremely important debate. I mean, what we take from this is I think there's a strong commitment both of this House, but also I assure
Mr. Meredith, we can no longer hear you, and now we can't even see you. Safari didn't help. So I'm asking the IT experts, you are used to these kind of situations. Do we have hope that We can reconnect, or shall we give it up? But nodding of the head means give up. Please take the floor. I can't hear you.
It's his internet connection.
Okay. So obviously there's no connection with Mr. Meredith. Mr. De Vigna, would you like to add something? What would Mr. Meredith have answered now?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. He may have mentioned the financial support that the EU is giving, and which we continue to do, particularly for the demining, 2.5 million. The humanitarian assistance was 16.9 million, which was provided to both countries on the basis of the needs. And we're ready to do more, but I think that that the political process needs to be restarted, and it is very much in the hands of both leaders. And I agree with those members who have said that negative rhetoric or so-called trophy museum, etc., do not help in this regard. The rhetoric needs to be toned down if one wants to start peace. We, as Europeans, are finished by that, know this since the EU was built after two world wars, as we all know. Thank you.
Thank you. On that note, I can conclude today's exchange of views. Mr. Meredith, if you are still connected and you can hear us, perhaps we could receive your reply in writing, and it could be distributed to the members. I would like to thank you for being connected remotely, and Mr. De Vigna for being here in the room, for your contributions. Our committee will continue to follow the situation in the Southern Caucasus very closely. And in the second half of next year, we will work on two own initiative reports, one on EU-Armenia relations and one on EU-Azerbaijan relations. Colleagues, I hope this was an opportunity to reflect on the situation on the ground, and in the meantime, we will all hope that tangible progress towards a lasting peace can and will be achieved. Thank you very much for your participation. I close now the meeting, and the coordinators' meeting of AFET will start in exactly 14 minutes. Thank you.